Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me for the Wednesday edition here of Point of View. We were supposed to talk with the Representative Van Taylor, who represents the 3rd Congressional District. We'll see if we can connect up with him. Having some technical difficulties here to even connect with anybody right at the moment, but we'll do our best to make that all work. In the meantime, let's start out with some good news. You know, probably need some of that, right? And that is the first coronavirus vaccine has promising results. First of all, this is something that we have been following for some time. There was this initial trial that took place with about 45 young volunteers, and that's kind of that phase 2, I believe, if I'm counting correctly here. And that looked very good because what it did was produce antibodies in the bloodstream of these individuals, which would then possibly neutralize the coronavirus. And so that's a good thing. And I went even to the original source in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a little more technical than we need. But we did post, I believe, if I can remember right, at least a little bit of information, yes, from Town Hall that gives you some of that. And because of this, now this would then suggest that they're now going to roll it out to the larger study. You might remember what they first do is see if what they're doing is safe at all. And that is usually to individuals so that you can make sure there aren't any side effects. So now, instead of 45 volunteers, this will now be tested on up to 30,000 individuals. And so this will also go to some individuals that now will maybe have pre-existing conditions. There'll also be an emphasis on testing the vaccine on minority groups, because we have seen that African American, Hispanic Americans sometimes have been hit heavily and ravaged by the virus. So that is the case. And so one of the features right now, and one of the heroes, if you will, in the area of epidemiology is Dr. Sarah Gilbert, University, I assume she has her doctorate, I may be wrong on that, University of Oxford candidate, and she actually has been involved with what has been taking place there in the UK with AstraZeneca. They are hoping to, if indeed these scaled up tests work, have 2 billion doses. And as we well know, there is only some evidence that they will hit the finish line successful. Because, as I've pointed out before, coming up with vaccines is a very long-term process. They have tried to figure out some ways to actually speed the process up. And one of those, which we've talked about in this program, is actually produce the vaccine before it's been completely tested, so that at the end, if they conclude that it's worthless, they'll just throw it away. But if they conclude that it's effective, then you might have that actually taking place. So that's just kind of an interesting side note. I have been watching over the last couple of days people having very significantly different estimates of when we get to, I hate this term, but it's the one they use, herd immunity. And that used to be assumed in the 60% range, 70% range, which is one of the reasons why you have Dr. Anthony Fauci saying, I don't think we'll ever reach that with a vaccine, because of the anti-vaccine mindset of so many Americans. I appreciate the fact that he is being honest, but at the same time, it isn't because there aren't reasonable concerns, which we've talked about before, especially when you speed up the process. We have some concerns from the 1970s. We have some more recent concerns from the Philippines, and I have a commentary on that you can go and read if you'd like to know more about that issue. But nevertheless, possibly good news, and the vaccine right now possibly would come in 2 doses, a month apart. But if indeed herd immunity is lower, and there is some pretty good material, matter of fact, just before the program here, since I thought I had Congressman Van Taylor, I kind of took my time in printing out this piece from Atlantic, which goes into that, in which they suggest herd immunity might be closer to 20% for a number of different reasons, which I won't get into technically, but it was just kind of intriguing to see what that might be. And if nothing else, we needed some good news, didn't we? So that's good news. In the meantime, though, there's still a lot of shutdown. Let's take the state of California for just a minute. We saw just earlier this week the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, pressed a panic button and locked down his state once again. This comes from the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. The causes of this are a surge, and the reason for that, somewhat complex, but most of the areas still apparently have hospital capacity. But once those various numbers for infections or death creep up, you can see that anybody wanting to run for re-election wants to react maybe too quickly, but that's what is happening in a number of states, and California sort of taking the lead right now. First governor so far to issue a statewide shelter-in-place order. This, of course, because of some of the things taking place there. You have a few places, Santa Clara and County and San Francisco County, that have kept restaurants, bars, and saloons open, but have kept restaurants closed, I should say. But they've nevertheless experienced kind of a surge there, even when they have. I got it backwards there. And then since June, hospitalizations have increased about 90% in Los Angeles, 95% in Orange County, 190% in San Francisco, 250% in Santa Clara County, 230% Fresno, and 260% in San Joaquin County. So you can see what those kinds of increases that you're going to see something that might cause a reaction like this. And so that is indeed the case. And, of course, you're going to probably see some other states now following suit because, after all, once the largest, the most populous state in the union does so, that will certainly be the case. The other issue that they have been looking at is why is it, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, you have certain individuals that have been hit harder than others. There is at least one theory, and I think it makes a pretty good theory, and that is that low-income individuals, African American, but especially Hispanic American, more likely to live in multi-generational households. So as a young person's out and about, at work, in play, whatever, they come back and infect the older family members. And so when we've gone back and looked at some of these hot spots, and I'm thinking New York City, we're thinking Detroit, but we're also thinking some of these demographic areas, it gives us a little bit of an indication as to why some of that has been taking place. So we do have some answers for those. And of course, we know why so many of the deaths took place in New York State, simply because of the crowding that was taking place in many of these homes, and where individuals were brought in because we did not want to discriminate against somebody who tested positive for COVID-19, so then they spread it to everyone else. But as we go back and look at what seems very random, that's really kind of the article in Atlantic. It gets us back to some of the things you study in graduate school called chaos theory and the rest. You can begin, once you begin to put some models together, figuring out why that is the case. And so, again, as this vaccine is being developed, they want to make a real significant attempt to make sure that those who are being tested are African American, Hispanic American, maybe even other people that live in low-income areas, because some of them have been hit the hardest with the virus, along with, of course, the elderly. Let's take a break. I believe we now will have a chance to talk with Representative Van Taylor. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The list of statues that have been defaced or torn down increases each week. What started a few years ago as an attempt to remove a few statues after an extended political debate has obviously spun out of control. What do George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, Winston Churchill, Gandhi, Cervantes, Voltaire, and guitarist Stevie Ray Vaughan have in common? Well, not much, but that's just a small representation of statues that have been defaced or pulled down. Then there is the defacing of the abolitionist Matthias Baldwin and the recent toppling of the statue of former slave and abolitionist Frederick Douglass. There's no consistency in anything these mobs are doing in the streets today. So while irrational people in the streets are tearing down statues and monuments, perhaps it is time for some of us, more rational citizens, to begin to think through what figures in the public square are appropriate or inappropriate. I think we can all agree that a leader who has consistently engaged in evil acts should not be memorialized. Adolf Hitler was an evil man. So was Joseph Stalin. We don't want statues of them in this country or any other. But I'm still wondering how a statue of Vladimir Lenin ended up in Seattle's Fremont neighborhood. Every group of heroes will have some flaws. Every leader will have flaws. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Fallen heroes and fallen leaders still deserve to be honored. When men and women have failed, they deserve to be forgiven. Michael Brendan Doherty reminds us that the beautiful sculpture of Michelangelo's David stands in Florence not as a tribute or an endorsement of the murder of Uriah the Hittite, just as George Washington's name does not grace our capital city or the names of our schools because he owned slaves. A statue or memorial can honor people without excusing its flaws. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
As we often like to do on this program, we have a chance to talk with Representative Van Taylor, representing the 3rd Congressional District for the state of Texas. And I thought I might mention that in addition to the link that we have to his website, vantaylorhouse.gov, we have a second link, and that is to the Congressional Youth Advisory Council. And so, first of all, Representative Van Taylor, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, great to be with you, Kerby, and great to be with all your listeners.
Let's, if we can, talk about this Congressional Youth Advisory Council. We have a separate link so that any young person that would want to participate in this is a great leadership opportunity. And let's talk about that, because there are some opportunities for some of our listeners to actually participate in this. And if nothing else, it's an opportunity to learn more about government, more about service and leadership before they even head off to college.
Sure. So the Congressional Youth Advisory Council was something that my predecessor, Sam Johnson, set up. And, you know, as I knocked on doors across the district, I just had many people who had either were parents of children that have been part of the Congressional Youth Advisory Council or themselves had graduated from the Congressional Youth Advisory Council say, that is a great program. We loved it. Please make sure you keep it. So last year, I started my inaugural Congressional Youth Advisory Council. There were 40 Collin County high school students who were in that, mostly juniors and seniors in high school. And there were probably 60 or 80 students that applied. So there are more people that want to be in than we have slots. And it's an opportunity for those students to meet with a district court judge, with a DA, with a federal district court judge, to meet with a mayor, to meet with a state representative, a state senator, And then they do it over a series of Saturday mornings usually, and sometimes in the evening on a weeknight. And so, for an hour or two or three. And then, of course, they get a one-on-one opportunity to ask me questions, and I really enjoy it. It's a great opportunity for young people to learn about our system of government, right? So they meet with their congressmen, they meet with their state legislators, they meet with local officials, and that all helps give them a perspective on government, on service. And we are accepting applications as we speak. You can go to vantaylor.house.gov/CYAC or Congressional Youth Advisory Council. And the deadline to apply is September 8th. Because of COVID, some of our meetings last year were actually done remotely. So we had some Zoom calls, including the graduation ceremony, which was by Zoom call. So a great opportunity. And I've had a lot of parents comment, wow, we really enjoyed it. A lot of kids, a lot of graduates said that was a great experience, and they were glad they had the chance to do it.
Again, if you go to our website, pointofview.net, we have a separate link so that you can find your way there. And perhaps you know of a young person, or maybe you are a young person listening right now that would benefit from this. And, of course, if you are in that 3rd Congressional District, you can enroll, and it's just a great opportunity. Okay, last night we had the runoffs for the Texas primary. No real surprises. I looked at a couple of people that were running in the runoffs, but if nothing else, and we now know who's going to challenge John Cornyn, well, at least we think we do. We now know many of the people on the ballot for various positions, and I think it is an illustration of the fact that even some of those runoffs were for like judges and things of that nature. So it, I think, is incumbent upon us, Representative Van Taylor, that we look all the way down the ballot, we research all the individuals. We will have iVoter Guide material on our website because each one of those positions are very important. And during this pandemic, I would have to say that up until a few months ago, a lot of people couldn't tell you who their county judge is. I bet they can now. They may not even know who was on their city council, but when the city council began to vote on some of the issues, they paid a little bit more attention. So it's important to look not only at what's at the top of the ballot, but all the way down to the bottom of the ballot, isn't it?
It is, and what I will say, the big winner last night, I think, was socialism, and so. For a long time, you have had a political continuum that was conservative and liberal. And last election, you watched a number of socialists be elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. And these are people that believe in open borders and defunding the police and a government takeover of health care, that believe in, getting rid of combustion engines. They have a very radical view of what the future should be. And some of them say they want to dismantle the entire system of government and to just dismantle our environmental system. If you have private health insurance, they want to take that away. They don't want you to have private health insurance. They want you to have government health care. And so these radical socialists are now in Congress, and there are going to be more of them next Congress. I think that and that is really changing the political landscape, where it's no longer liberal versus conservative, but really people who are pro-American and pro-socialist. And so you people that want the current system and see need for improvement, and people that want to do away with the entire system, to go to open borders, to get rid of the police, to take away private health care and go to a government-run health care system. And that's really, and there are going to be some big decisions made by the American people, being made in November. And that's what we're gearing up to have a big conversation in this country about, is do we want to be a socialist country, or do we want to be continue to be the greatest nation on earth?
As illustrated by the fact that you look at the Dallas Morning News poll and another one from the University of Texas at Tyler, saying that at the moment, if you believe the polls, and again, the only poll that really matters happens November, but Joe Biden up 48 points to 43 points to Donald Trump. The possibility that John Cornyn could not win based on the previous time in which you had Ted Cruz basically only winning by a few points over Beto O'Rourke. So for anybody that thinks that you're talking about something that really won't happen, people with very liberal, progressive, even socialist ideas being elected, if you look at some of the polls right now, this is why the headline says Democrats grow more bullish on Texas, because even in the state of Texas, they believe that they might be able to put together a winning coalition with some of the things you just mentioned.
Well, and again, I think that, one thing that I will say that I see in the Congress today is you're watching the old line liberal leaders being felled by these new socialist upstarts, right? So AOC replaced a straight line, hardcore liberal with her socialist ideology, and the congressman that she replaced had been there for a while and was very experienced and was very high ranking within the Democrat caucus in the U.S. House. You watched a committee chair defeated 2 weeks ago, very strongly liberal. Democrat was defeated by a socialist, anti-Israel, anti-borders, pro-government-controlled healthcare socialist. And so you're watching the old line liberals fall to these new socialists that are rising up around the country. And I assure you that the next Congress will have more socialists in it than this Congress.
Wow.
And the question is, how many more and how much further will we let these socialists go in their efforts to fundamentally dismantle our country and not, tear down statues and get rid of police and open up our borders? I mean, are we going to allow that? And it's going to be decided in the ballot box in November.
I would think so. Just before I let you go, and of course, maybe we can keep you over the break if that's possible, because I do know you have another interview later. A lot of people wondering, is there going to be any more relief for COVID-19 and those kinds of things? And what do you see happening in Congress right now, given the fact that it's an election year and lots of times not much happens in Congress before an election year, even less during an election year? What do you think might happen over the next couple of months?
Yeah, so last year, 2019, you watched the Democrats in the U.S. House pass a whole series of messaging bills, which was very disappointing because there were absolutely points of agreement and opportunities for change that were very real. That certainly I and I think every American wanted to see problems solved and progress made. The Democrats chose to do messaging. With the rise of COVID, you watched Congress come together on a bipartisan basis to pass a series of packages. Unfortunately, you watched the Democrats with their most recent act in the House, basically pass a completely partisan bill and really go back to their usual corner of messaging bills versus actual progress. And I think you and I have had this conversation, Kerby, but in the Texas legislature, I'd never heard of a messaging bill. That was not a thing.
Only in Congress.
In Congress, only in Congress. Well, why are you doing this? This bill will go nowhere. It will go nowhere. You've designed it to go nowhere. If you change this, and this, then it would actually go somewhere. You could make a difference. It may not be everything you want, but the old Ronald Reagan say, if you give me half a loaf, I'll take it.
Yeah.
So I think, the quick answer to your question, we'll get into more after break, is that I think that you will see another relief package over the next 3 weeks, starting.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, we have Representative Van Taylor with us for just a few more minutes because we weren't able to connect up with him initially. We're going to get into the issue of China and some of the material we've posted here, but I thought Representative Van Taylor, we talked about, the pandemic relief bill, whether anything's going to happen there, but there is the National Defense Authorization Act, and you have the appropriations, you have those packages, water and resources, and a number of others, and you're trying to, as I understand, secure language to help some local communities with flooding. So tell us about that, if you might.
Sure. So, I am the ambassador, I'm the congressman for Collin County, Texas. And so in that capacity, it's my job to work, on local problems that need a federal fix. And so one of those problems is flooding in Fairview, Texas, along an estuary that is controlled by the Corps of Engineers. And so what I have done is asked in an act that is going through Congress next week that the Corps of Engineers conduct a study to figure out how they can ameliorate that problem. And so again, that is basic blocking and tackling. It's not sexy. It's not going to. It will probably make the paper in Fairview. But again, it's important. It needs to be done. And there are a whole series of different things that I'm working on, and I'm excited to have gotten that done. Another thing that should be coming up in the Labor, Health, and Human Services appropriations bill in the next couple of weeks here in Congress is going to be a study of dual credit classes. That is something that Collin County has really led on. And we find that when a student takes a single dual credit course, they are actually more likely to graduate from college. They graduate with less debt, with a higher GPA, and they usually graduate a semester sooner. So apparently, if high school is harder, you do better in college. Who knew? And so what I'm asking to do is to try to highlight the importance of dual credit classes. And so I'm asking for a study to examine that on a national level. So we've actually done that here in Texas. The University of Texas system did a study of the impact of dual credit on students. And you've actually watched several community colleges around the country have done that, but you have not seen a federal national study. And I think you really want to elevate that into the conscience of parents and students that, hey, dual credit classes is a great way to get more rigor in high school, which then in turn will generate better performance in college and reduce student debt, improve graduation rates, and get us to a more educated, more successful society. So this is an important step forward. I was excited to have some help from my colleagues across the aisle to work with me on a bipartisan basis to get this language into the appropriations bills that are coming up next week.
Just before I let you go, let's again talk about it's at vantaylor.house.gov. And there are places where, as you go there, if you're a student or senior, family, small business, veterans, educators, whatever, you have had such an incredible number of meetings. I've heard the number of times you've met with individuals. You have always had an open door. And so if somebody has a comment or a question or would like a meeting with you, you are more than gracious to provide that, aren't you?
Sure. I have a 100% meeting policy, so I've met with every constituent that has asked to have a meeting with me, and I just believe that I'm going to do a better job serving the people of my district if I take the time to listen to them, and look, some of the very best legislative ideas I've ever had come from the people that I listen to. This Fairview flooding. I mean, that was something I didn't dream up. I mean, I had people in Fairview come to me and say, "Hey, we've got a problem, Congressman." I started looking at it and say, "Okay, well, let me see what I can do." And so this is what we're doing. And the same thing with dual credit. That's something that the Plano School Board brought to me in 2015 when I was in the Texas Senate, and I worked on legislation to expand access to dual credit classes and worked on that. And we have some great dual credit offerings in the Collin County schools, and I think that you want to see. We're really, in Collin County, setting the example for great schools around the country. And so this is a great opportunity to highlight how important dual credit classes are and to really have that be more in the conscience of American educators and students.
Again, Representative Van Taylor, always great to have you on the program. I'll give you a break before you do your next interview. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks, Kerby. Great to be with you.
We're going to take a break in just a minute, but before we do, let me get into China. Penna Dexter is going to be with me at the 2 o'clock hour, and there's certainly no doubt that we'll get into it again. But Gary Bauer the other day reminded us of the fact that communist China, or again, we're not critical of the Chinese people, but the Chinese people are ruled by communists. And a good illustration of that is he points out that this top virologist in China actually fled China to Hong Kong, defected to the United States, and in an interview that she gave the other day, Dr. Yang, to Fox News, she talked about the fact she was one of the first Chinese doctors to begin researching this coronavirus. And she knew that there was human-to-human transmission. She knew that the virus presented a serious threat of becoming an uncontrollable pandemic. But her superiors there, led by the communist Chinese, warned her to keep quiet or she would just simply disappear. Now, as you might remember, the Chinese authorities then were telling the World Health Organization the coronavirus was not contagious to humans, which was false, and they knew it. And Dr. Yan continued to watch the lies coming out of Beijing, coming out of the World Health Organization. That's when she decided to flee to Hong Kong in order to tell the truth about what she knew. Her husband refused to leave, warning that the Chinese authorities will kill us all. And I really don't know what happened to them, by the way. But since this outbreak began, Donald Trump has been quick to lay the blame squarely on where it belonged, on the Chinese Communist Party, and we now know a lot more about that. So it's not surprising that last week the Trump administration started to impose sanctions against senior Communist Party leaders there in China, responsible for the country's ethnic cleansing of the Muslims in that area. And so this was one of the action items that was taken last week. But then, even more recently, there has been a desire to confront the Chinese directly. Again, quoting from Gary Bauer's end-of-day report yesterday, in which he says that you have the FBI director, Christopher Wray, who gave a very shocking presentation describing the threat from Beijing. He warned that nearly half of all the FBI's current counterintelligence cases are focused just on China. Half of them. You know, there are 190 plus countries. Half of the cases are Chinese. I'm going to talk about the NBA and maybe LeBron James in just a minute, but let's get back to this. First of all, Director Christopher Wray described the frequent cyber attacks from China to the United States, the predatory trade practices, and even the economic espionage that they've been engaged in, which has now become one of the largest transfers of wealth in human history. Then the Chinese government has, of course, infiltrated American colleges, universities, and government research facilities. Recently, it was reported that more than 50 scientists were fired by the National Institutes of Health for failing to disclose their financial ties to China. And the chairman of the Harvard Chemistry Department was indicted, you might remember, earlier this year because of his ties to the communist regime. But even beyond that, there is the mounting aggressive military buildup and the projecting of what's called hard power around the world, especially in the area known as the South China Sea. And so yesterday there was a real pushback to some of that. This comes from the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who said, "Today we are strengthening U.S. policy in a vital and contentious part of Asia, the South China Sea. We're making it clear that Beijing's claim to offshore resources across most of the South China Sea are completely unlawful, as it's its campaign of bullying to control them. The People's Republic of China has no legal grounds to unilaterally impose its will on the region." He went on to say, "The world will not allow Beijing to treat the South China Sea as its maritime empire. America stands with our Southeast Asian allies and partners in protecting their sovereign rights to offshore resources. We stand with the international community in defense of freedom of the seas and respect for sovereignty and reject any push to impose might makes right in the South China Sea or the wider region. And so, if nothing else, you're also starting to see that other countries are joining into this. The United Kingdom, for example, is banning the Chinese telecom giant from its 5G networks. And so we're going to see what happens here in this country as well. So there are a lot of issues to address with China. But one of the articles I posted has to do with China and the NBA. A little bit of a dust up here, and for those of us that love to watch basketball but are horrified by the unwillingness to address some of the abuse of China, money's involved, you might guess. We'll come back and talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In a couple hours, when Penna Dexter and I are together, we're going to spend a little more time talking about China, but I thought I'd at least focus on this about China and the NBA. Of course, there's also the question about TikTok and a number of others. All those issues are on the table, and we'll certainly talk about those later. But I thought this particular piece by Tom Joyce reminds us of kind of the hypocrisy that is taking place, and one of those has to do with what he says when it comes to social justice, the NBA is filled with activists. When it comes to China, criticism is nowhere to be found. And he points out that over the weekend, you might know that there was a reporter, Adrian Wojnarowski, who was suspended by ESPN for emailing the mouth on this guy. By the way, he's not the only one. There's a couple of others that have just such an awful mouth. This Democratic strategist who went after Marsha Blackburn just would you ever put this in an email? But nevertheless, this is just crazy. And he's swears at the senator from Missouri, Josh Hawley, and the reason is Josh Hawley has expressed his concern about the fact that here the NBA commissioner, that'd be Adam Silver, is allowing any of these athletes to wear all sorts of things, Black Lives Matter on their uniforms and all sorts of stuff. These patches, which I think really are no place for an athlete, are allowed. But, of course, not a word can be said about China, and even was criticizing the league's warm relationship with that. And so if you look at some of the NBA stars, LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, you look at some of the coaches, Greg Popovich, Steve Kerr, whatever, they are oftentimes very critical of the president, and the president gives them lots of reason to be critical. But boy, you say anything about China, it changes. And I think the thing that brought this to a head was what happened last year. You might remember we talked about the fact that the general manager of the Houston Rockets, Daryl Morey, just tweeted an image in which he talked about fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong. Well, that was the unforgivable sin, which, by the way, Morey later apologized for, but the whole NBA just came, the whole roof came down upon him because, as Tom Joyce points out, follow the money. The NBA isn't afraid if criticizing somebody in this country, but it's a little different when you talk about anything involving the Chinese Communist Party. And as we pointed out just a minute ago, the Chinese Communist Party has links in a lot of different areas, not only of business, but of academic world and all the rest. And as Tom Joyce points out in this article, which you can read in its entirety, even though China is an authoritarian regime, even though it is trampling over the rights of Muslims and fellow Chinese and others, the NBA has been allowed access to the Chinese market, and they're trying to grow a fan base there. And so when you have 1 billion people that live in China, and NBA's website acknowledges that more than 500 million people in the country watch an NBA game, and those people buy merchandise, as we say so often around here, follow the money. Now, of course, there is a significant cost to all of this in terms of your moral stance, because as Tom Joyce points out, he gives footnotes for every one of these here. This is a country which we just mentioned a minute ago has been producing counterfeit goods that are destroying jobs in this country. It has a role in the opioid epidemic, which we haven't talked about, may get into later. You have, of course, the rampant intellectual property theft, which we did mention. Of course, the inhumane working conditions, its treatment, of course, the Muslims, the Uyghurs, and, of course, the oppression of Hong Kong, Tibet, and Taiwan, to mention just a few. So what you have are some very interesting situations in which Guy Benson today also picks up on this. He said, not only has LeBron James remained silent about China's escalating human rights abuses, he actually pressured the NBA to punish the Houston Rockets executive, who I just mentioned a minute ago, for the sin of publicly supporting the people of Hong Kong against aggressive encroachments from the communists of Beijing. So Guy Benson points out that LeBron James will brag about leveraging his platform for justice, and the NBA will stencil, are you ready for this? Black Lives Matter on its courts for the upcoming season. But those suffering under the, what he calls jackboot of Chinese oppression will just have to continue to suffer. And, of course, then he also mentions the fact that you have this ESPN journalist, Adrian Wojnarowski, who emailed the office of Senator Josh Hawley in response to a statement that was somewhat critical of the way in which the NBA was coddling all of that. And if that's not enough, now, and I did not know this until I read this commentary, LeBron James has now put out tweets in which he wants this ESPN personality to be, quote, freed from suspension, which was prompted by his profane outburst at a United States senator. which, of course, came because of some of the ways in which the NBA has interacted with China. So thought I would just give you a little bit more of a look, and we'll get into China more in the next hour because that is just the tip of the iceberg of why we should be concerned about China. We'll talk about TikTok. The argument of TikTok is, well, they're collecting all this data from young people that are doing TikToks and videos and things like that. And the only defense I've seen, which we'll get into in about an hour or two, is that, well, look what Twitter and Facebook collect in terms of data. Well, that doesn't make it right. Matter of fact, we're upset about that somewhat. But there is a difference. Facebook is not a sworn enemy of the people of the United States. The Communist Party in China is. And how they would use that data against us could be really of concern. So, if nothing else, just wanted to get into a topic we don't talk about too often, but this week China's been in the news because of the NBA, because of TikTok, because some of the statements made by Mike Pompeo. And so we just wanted to mention a little of it now, and we'll get into it more in the 2 o'clock hour when Penna Dexter joins me as well. By the way, as a program note, let me just mention that Steve Stewart will be with us once again. He was with us in May. His book is entitled When Everything Changes, Healing, Justice, and the Kingdom of God. But and most importantly, we're going to talk about what can we do to help some of these individuals in other countries that are suffering right now with COVID-19. So we'll talk about that. And as we do that, let me just mention we're coming just to the very end of our $100,000 match fund. I checked just a little bit ago. We got a few dollars left to go. So I guess whoever would like to call in, even as we go to a break, you can maybe put us over the top. And when Penna joins us at 2 o'clock, maybe we can celebrate actually reaching our goal. So we're down just a few hundred left, but we're getting there. And let me just mention my Viewpoints commentary today is available to you on statues. We've talked about this before, all sorts of statues coming down, but this was my attempt to say, okay, there are irrational people tearing down statues and monuments right and left. But can some of us more rational citizens begin to think through what figures in the public square might be appropriate and which ones would be inappropriate? And so I just try to give you a little bit of a sense of that. I think we'd all agree that it would be inappropriate to put up a statue of somebody that's always been an evil person, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, people like that. But on the other hand, recognize that every leader is going to have a flaw because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And just because we put up a statue or a memorial for an individual doesn't mean we're excusing their flaws. Just as we've said before, this beautiful statue of Michelangelo's David in Florence, Italy, is not a tribute to or an endorsement of his murder of Uriah the Hittite, any more than by having George Washington's name on Washington, D.C. is done because he owned slaves, but because he was the founder of this country and certainly deserves that level of respect. Let's take a break, though. We're going to get into what we can do to reach out to others around the world, and all of that coming up right after these important messages.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that point of view is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It's the Wednesday edition here of Point of View, and this hour we're going to be chatting with, in just a few minutes, Steve Stewart. Next hour, Penna Dexter will join me as we get into some of the issues that we have posted on our website. First one I wanted to mention, and then we'll get to the others in the next hour. We'll get into the conversation about China, some of the concerns about China, China and the NBA, China and TikTok, and some of those issues that have surfaced. And we'll get into that. Also, one that I've creatively titled, Who Will the Leftist Mob Attack Next? It's based on a very good piece by Victor Davis Hanson. So we'll get to that in the next hour. But I just thought maybe we start out with some good news. We always need good news, right? And that is, our first article is talking about the fact that this first vaccine that seems to have now gone through the second set of trials, now going to the expanded one, is really showing some promise. And so a lot of people have been paying attention to the work of the University of Oxford candidate Sarah Gilbert, work being done of AstraZeneca, in which it seems to have been working with the study that was done of 45 young volunteers, which shows that it produces these neutralizing antibodies in the bloodstream. And it actually has a link, if you want to read it, which I did, to the New England Journal of Medicine and see what that might produce. And because of that, now they will expand to the larger test for about 30,000 people, which would then include people with pre-existing conditions, also really trying to make sure that it can be used on African American, Hispanic Americans. Sometimes they have been very heavily ravaged by the virus. So we'll be watching this. And AstraZeneca, as I've pointed out in a previous commentary, by the way, if you'd like to know a little bit more about these vaccines, I did do a Viewpoints commentary a while back in which I explained the different ways in which the vaccines are being developed. Also raised some of the questions. There are some very good questions. When we do it this fast, are there possible concerns? Yes, there are. But also, in order to fast track it, they're hoping to produce 2 billion doses of this vaccine even before it's been completely tested, because if the test works out, they're ready to go. If the test turns out to not work out, well, then they'll just have to destroy those. So that's kind of what's going on behind the scenes. And if that's not good enough news, one of the issues associated with getting the virus, getting the vaccine is, and I always hate this term, you want to get to what's called herd immunity. Very good article that appeared in The Atlantic, in which they point out that the research originally done all the way back in February by Harvard epidemiologist Mark Lipschitz actually thought that maybe the herd immunity would happen maybe at 40% of the population, could be as high as 70% of the population. That's a concern, because you'd have to say this many people would have to have actually had the disease, the coronavirus, COVID-19, and have at least enough antibodies in their bloodstream, or enough people would have had to take the vaccine. And there are a lot of Americans right now that aren't sure they want to take the vaccine. So that 40% to 70% seemed pretty high, and suggested that this is going to be with us a long time. But in this article, it also talks about Gabriella Gomes, who is a professor in a university in Glasgow, Scotland, who's been running all sorts of models suggesting that the models keep coming back at maybe 20%. And if that's the case, if the threshold in this is at or below 20%, That may be good news. So these are the kind of scientific issues I like to bring to you from time to time. And I suspect you probably haven't heard a great deal about that, especially for our listeners out there in the state of California, because you know that your governor, Gavin Newsom, has decided to press the panic button. That's how the editors of the Wall Street Journal described it, and lock down the state once again. The lockdowns had already been taking place in some places like Santa Clara County, San Francisco County, and all the rest. And of course, you could see the hospitalizations are starting to go up in places like, 90% in Los Angeles, 95% in Orange County, 190% in San Francisco County, 250% in Santa Clara County, 230% in Fresno, 260% in San Joaquin County. You can kind of see what's going on there. So we will pay attention to that as well. And when Penna Dexter joins me in the next hour, we'll probably get into it in more detail. But we thought we might bring back to the microphone Steve Stewart. He is the founder and president of Impact Nations, an individual who, after he became a Christian, first pastored churches, began to be involved in all sorts of activities, planting churches. But in 2003, his direction of his life really changed. And so he began to think about, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And a book that I would recommend to you, which came out 8 years ago, and then there's a newer edition that came out in round numbers about 5 years ago, called When Everything Changes, Healing, Justice, and the Kingdom of God. We have information about Impact Nations and the book on our website, pointofview.net. So Steve Stewart, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Thanks, Kerby. Good to be with you.
Can you tell a little bit of the story? Because I've seen you on 100 Huntley Street and other places tell the story, but it is pretty amazing how, in some respects, God got a hold of you and it really changed the whole direction of your life.
Yeah, he did. As you said in the intro, I had been a church planter, planted about 7 churches in Canada and 1 in Russia. And the Lord had just been so gracious to us that I sort of presumed at that point in my life that that's what I would just keep doing through my working life. I was flying home from doing a conference for Christian businessmen in Seoul, Korea, on the airplane when suddenly the presence of the Lord just came around to me. I wasn't praying, I wasn't doing anything. And he asked me very clearly, he said, "What do you want to do with the rest of your life? I'll let you do anything." And I was rather stunned by that. But as I processed it, my response to him was, well, if I can do anything with the rest of my life, I want to rescue lives. I want to rescue them spiritually. I want to rescue them educationally, emotionally, socially, medically. That's what I want to do. And nobody but my wife, Christina, knew about that encounter, and yet within weeks I started getting emails and phone calls from people, most of whom I'd never heard of in my life, inviting me to come. So I started to go, and before long people said, "Can we come too?" And that evolved into Impact Nations. I was still pastoring, but I was away more and more and more, so I was co-pastoring with someone, and the turning point, the final turning point came actually 5 years later when I was doing all this other stuff, when I'd been away again for, 5 or 6 weeks, and I came back to the church Sunday morning, and there was a new welcome team, and they invited me to sign the guest book, and I was their pastor. So I thought, I think it's about time. And so that's what we have been doing full-time. Impact Nations has been going for about 15 years now.
Yes. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to get into all the details because there is an opportunity for what we call COVID feeding. A little bit later, as we come out of some of these lockdowns, there are the journeys of compassion that I wanted you to know about. And, of course, we'll talk about this issue of relief and skills and business training, face masks for freedom. There's just a lot of information. You might want to go to impactnations.com right now to check that out. We'll be talking about that when we return right after these messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The list of statues that have been defaced or torn down increases each week. What started a few years ago as an attempt to remove a few statues after an extended political debate has obviously spun out of control. What do George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, Winston Churchill, Gandhi, Cervantes, Voltaire, and guitarist Stevie Ray Vaughan have in common? Well, not much, but that's just a small representation of statues that have been defaced or pulled down. Then there is the defacing of the abolitionist Matthias Baldwin and the recent toppling of the statue of former slave and abolitionist Frederick Douglass. There's no consistency in anything these mobs are doing in the streets today. So while irrational people in the streets are tearing down statues and monuments, perhaps it is time for some of us, more rational citizens, to begin to think through what figures in the public square are appropriate or inappropriate. I think we can all agree that a leader who has consistently engaged in evil acts should not be memorialized. Adolf Hitler was an evil man. So was Joseph Stalin. We don't want statues of them in this country or any other. But I'm still wondering how a statue of Vladimir Lenin ended up in Seattle's Fremont neighborhood. Every group of heroes will have some flaws. Every leader will have flaws. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Fallen heroes and fallen leaders still deserve to be honored. When men and women have failed, they deserve to be forgiven. Michael Brendan Doherty reminds us that the beautiful sculpture of Michelangelo's David stands in Florence not as a tribute or an endorsement of the murder of Uriah the Hittite, just as George Washington's name does not grace our capital city or the names of our schools because he owned slaves. A statue or memorial can honor people without excusing its flaws. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Steve Stewart of Impact Nations, and let me just encourage you to go to the website, which we have on our website, so you can find out more about this book, which would really challenge you, but also, of course, what we are going to be talking about on the website, because, Steve, as you pointed out, you want to rescue lives spiritually, supernaturally, economically, medically, educationally, and in some respects, that's what the gospel is all about. I sometimes run into people who say, well, we just want to preach the gospel, or we just want to do good works. Well, it's not an either or. You oftentimes have to feed hungry stomachs before you can feed hungry souls. And you recognize that whether you are giving a cup of cold water and you're planting a church, or you're actually providing medical care, or you're digging a well for clean water, whether you're feeding the hungry, all of it is part of the gospel, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things we sometimes say, if it's not good news to the poor, then it's not good news. Jesus was very, very clear. In fact, he said in Matthew 11, he said preaching good news to the poor was one of the signs of the kingdom. So we absolutely believe that and hold hard on to that, that the gospel is big enough to touch every part of life, and it really must. And so we work really hard on that, Kerby, in lots of different ways, that we are always engaged with the spiritual well-being, but also the physical well-being. And over the years, we discovered we really had to learn how to hold that in balance, because, as you just said, there's well-meaning folks who say, no, the gospel is about telling them the good news and getting them to pray a prayer. And others say, no, it's to do good works. The two have always gone hand in hand right back to the early church.
Before we get into some of the practical aspects, one of the things you talk about in your book, and I've heard you in some of the teaching, is to also clear up the misconception about this idea of the kingdom of God, because some have said, well, the kingdom is heaven, or the kingdom is almost that, the church, or the kingdom is just kind of in your heart. But what, exactly did Jesus mean when he talked about the kingdom of God? Because that also, I think, helps people understand the vision that really was something that impacted you and caused you to create Impact Nations.
Yeah, absolutely. The word basileia means the rule or reign of God, so where God is ruling and reigning. Jesus said that it is come, it is coming, it is here, it is in our midst. He said it in so many different ways. Really, it is, I think it's heaven now. I think it is when we pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Jesus was saying, I come bringing the reality of the age to come. So the kingdom has come. It's not fully come. I personally don't think it'll fully come until he comes again, but has come and is increasing and increasing. And so, I'm convinced there's no poverty in heaven. There's no hungry children in heaven. But likewise, there aren't blind and deaf people in heaven. And so for us, when we pray for someone and the Lord just gloriously opens their eyes or their ears or they get up and walk, what's happened is the reality of heaven has come. The age to come has penetrated this present age at that particular time and place and brought that ultimate reality.
Yes. And for those of us that teach occasionally in seminary, sometimes which I'm invited as a guest, we'll talk about it as the kingdom exists now, but not yet in its fullness. So we recognize that we have a responsibility to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world. We have a responsibility to the poor, to the downtrodden and others, but also we recognize that we look forward to the second coming of Christ, in which it will come in all its fullness. And so that is the case as well. And it also gets back to something else I know you've written about, and that is, if we're talking about the kingdom of God, we're also talking about a king, and that is a responsibility to serve, because we have a servant king, an inviting king, a rescuing king, and those kinds of things. Can you fill that out as well for us?
I'll be glad to try to do it briefly. That when Jesus said, follow me, I think we want to know who we're following. And as you said, he's the seeking king. Jesus was not sitting in his office. He was always out there seeking. We're told in Luke 19, the Son of Man came to seek and to save. So that's what he was doing. He was out there always. And so if we're going to follow him, I think we need the same pattern. Likewise, he was the inviting king. As I said in this book, and it developed it quite a bit, that Jesus lived the most inclusive life that was ever lived. We've got some new products that are coming out, some T-shirts, and one of them says gospel is always inclusive. And so, again, if we're going to follow him, we must live a very inclusive life. And he was the serving king, and he was out serving all the time. Mark 10:45, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. For me, Kerby, this was very practical years ago as a young pastor when I saw this, and I would build into my work week, even though the church was growing by leaps and bounds. It was all the grace of God, but I insisted that I would take a block every week. I'd take an afternoon out in my community, seeking, inviting, but mainly serving. I'm trying to follow the serving king. And so I think when we get a hold of that, church life changes rapidly. I know we were blessed with churches that grew with people that weren't transferring from other churches. They had encountered the kingdom. Sometimes we pray for the sick, but sometimes it's the simplest thing. We give some groceries to a single mom. Or even, I remember giving cold sodas out and a newspaper picking it up, and that wasn't our intention at all. It's if we can realize that the kingdom of God is is tangible, it's practical, it's not theory, and it's not the future.
Sure.
It's, as George Ladd said, it's the present of the future. He also said it's the already and the not yet. So
already and not yet, which is one of the phrases we use sometimes. Let's just, before we take a break, just talk about the fact that, a lot of people, Steve, think, well, I'm never going to be a missionary because I'm never going to go overseas. Well, you can be a missionary in your own community, and what you just talked about a minute ago is a good illustration. I mean, if we just have eyes to see, there are hurting people even in our communities that either have financial needs, they probably all have spiritual and emotional needs, especially with some of the lockdowns and things like that. And there's just an opportunity to just within your own neighborhood have a dynamic ministry. And a lot of that comes from having a pastor like you that says, you just don't come to church, sit and watch the professionals do it and then go home like you're watching a football game. No, everybody's a participant and everybody's a missionary and everybody's a believer priest, right?
And isn't that what Jesus always said? Come follow me. Come follow me. And so I try even in my own life to just, even with the shutdown, and I'm in New Mexico, although I'm talking to you today from Pennsylvania, but where it's pretty strict, but it's not so strict that I can't go to a really poor neighborhood, the International District, and go and at 6 feet away pray for people. It's not so strict that I can't get my grandchildren to help me make lunches for the homeless, that we discover we're made for this. And what you just said, even in our own street, our own neighborhood, I think one of the great keys, if we could unlock, is the gift of hospitality, which is not fellowship. Fellowship's wonderful, but two entirely different words in the Greek. Hospitality is when I reach out beyond my Christian circle. And if we can do that in the simplest ways, on everybody's street, there's senior citizens who nobody visits. There's kids who are sort of outcast socially, right? In every school, there's the kids nobody wants to be with. On every street, there's tension and difficulty with marriages or teenage kids, whatever it may be. If we can begin to be hospitable, what Vanier calls the gift of welcome, if we can give room in our lives, now we're back to the gospel is always inclusive. If we can make room in our lives, people are made for the kingdom. They're made for Christ who lives in us. They don't even know that. And they're just drawn to hospitality, to kindness, etc. I think it's really one of the greatest keys to seeing a huge shift in North America.
I would agree. Let's take a break and we'll talk about what you can do through Impact Nations, because there's some great projects that can be a part of that. Let me just mention that today is when we finish our matching fund, and last time I checked, we're still a few $100 away, but I suspect a few of you may just step up, and the next hour when Penna Dexter and I are together, maybe we'll be able to celebrate the fact that we met that need. So let's take a break. We still have that link on our website, pointofview.net, and we'll continue our conversation with Steve Stewart right after this.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. What is your church doing to reach out to those in your community that you can serve? I'd love to hear about that. Perhaps you have some thoughts about how we can reach across even the oceans and use the various technologies we have, even if we can't get in an airplane right now and fly to some of those places, although I think some of that is starting to open up. Love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. Steve Stewart with us, and he is the founder and president of Impact Nations. You can go to impactnations.com. And Steve, back in May when you were with us, you talked about COVID Feeding Fund. And for many of our listeners, certainly this pandemic has been an irritant, a difficulty, certainly an inconvenience at the very least. But for people that you are ministering with and to, this is more than just an inconvenience. It's life or death. And it is amazing to me what, say, $30 can do to feed a family. Talk about that if you might.
Sure. We have teams working in a bunch of nations right now. In North India, we've got 41 teams every day going out, risking their own help to distribute food. And we have had very literal examples of people dying before we got to them. So that's how serious it is.
Yes.
Kerby, I used to be confused by the literal translation in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day tomorrow's bread. What is that? Well, it's, of course, for day laborers, which is the majority of the world. I have to work today, and at the end of the day, I get paid so that I can buy food for my family for tomorrow. And with no social net, it's been awful. Now, one of the things that we are absolutely thrilled about, when I was with you in May, I'm not sure, I think we were maybe, 300,000 meals, which we were astounded by. As of last week, since March 26th, 936,000 meals. So I'm presuming before the month is out, we will be well over 1 million meals.
Yeah, closing in on 1 million. I saw that number, and I remember the difference. And let's hope at least a few of our listeners contributed to that. And if they don't, they can now, can't they?
They can, and they did, actually. So that's a great help for us. Just so that before I forget, because I easily get distracted, you picked up on your intro there in terms of how we as churches can impact our neighborhoods and our communities. My most recent book, which they can see on the website, is called The First Church Restored. And it goes through all of that, how the early church did it, how it's happening where the church is exploding, how it can happen in a North American context, with some real practical things. So if anyone is interested in what you brought up at the beginning there, The First Church Restored is on our website, in our bookstore. Now, you asked me about what we're doing. If they look on the website, they'll see the feeding programs, which we just talked about. But, we're now able to start to get some of our skills in business training and businesses going again. They've shut down. And now there's a beginning. I think, for example, we've got a graphic and web design school for people in the slums, and it's turned into an online school like so many have here in the West. The website was actually put together by a group of people from the slums in Kampala.
Wow.
We have a partner, Trinity. He does great work. He's set up a whole community store. Before that, he fed, I really don't remember, 200,000 meals or something in his slum. So they can see about that. And then that face mask for freedom is just fascinating. And I only found out about it when everybody else did. It's often the case now, just because there's a lot going on. But by people clicking on that, they can provide funds for masks. And why that's a triple win is the masks, of course, help save lives. too, in Uganda, you're not allowed to go out and look for work. You can't go out of the house without a mask, and of course, so many don't have them. So that it allows that freedom to go out and shop and look for work. But 3, it also provides income for our gals, our team, which are mainly teenage girls rescued off the streets out of prostitution and abuse. They've been in a long process of healing and training and equipping and ministry, but it provides income for them to make those masks. So it's a really powerful donation if people want to do that. One of the things, I'm just looking down at some notes because I got a call from the office. We were really excited to be able to come back. Thanks for having me back.
Sure.
They've done something for your audience today. If they want to go impactnations.com/Sabbath, I wrote an ebook just as this pandemic was breaking on what Sabbath means for us and how countercultural it is, etc. If they want to go to that, again, impactnations.com/Sabbath, we'll give that to them as a gift today for your listeners.
Let me just mention that again. We'll try to create a link here in just a few minutes, but again, go to impactnations.com/Sabbath, and it's the power of Sabbath rest. If you really struggled with true rest, especially in these tumultuous times, this would be an understanding of what the idea of the Sabbath is, and really seeing the Sabbath as freedom, as abiding, as who you trust. And so again, it's an ebook that you can just download, and all that information is available at the website. And that is just, of course, one of the resources. But we just mentioned your book in passing, so we should also, mention that again, which is The First Church Restored. And you can go to their shop and find out a little bit more information about that as well. So these are all ways in which people can get involved. But Steve, I am optimistic enough to know that one of these days we're going to get out of this shelter in place. And if there's one thing that I know that you have done and probably enjoy doing, and probably certainly can really help cast a vision, it is this idea of journeys of compassion, because then people can kind of come along with you and see what actually is taking place, and they can see how their prayers and their investments are actually fulfilling the Great Commission.
Absolutely. We love the journeys. That was really the first thing we began doing. We've done 76 of them now in, I don't remember, 23 countries or something. And what happens is we gather, we take about a day and a half together where I do some teaching and so forth, although people get to go online beforehand and get a whole, 5 hours of teaching. But we do the orientation, and then we go out as a team to the front lines, often in villages, sometimes in city slums, but all over the world, South America, Eastern Europe, Asia, Africa. And what I love is, and it goes back to where you and I started this interview, that the gospel touches every part of life. So every day we're on the front lines, and everybody is, as Wimber used to say, doing the stuff. So every day people are working in our mobile medical clinics. We've got all that set up for not just the doctors and nurses, but a role for everybody. Every day they're distributing anti-malarial nets. They're feeding the poor, but also every day they're leading folks to Jesus and praying for the sick. A person who comes on a trip, at the end of 12 days, they will have led more people to Christ than they can remember. They will have seen more healing than they can remember. And it changes people forever. I know this because we have so many ongoing, hundreds and hundreds of ongoing relationships with people as they go back to Australia or America or Canada or Europe. Because you can't have the Lord use you in both these practical and supernatural ways day after day and go back to life as normal. And so we're very, very excited about them. We've had every background. We've had non-Christians come. We've had many pastors come. It's just been wonderful. And really, what they do is not only the benefit for those of us who go, but of course a huge impact in an area. We'll go into an area, and by the way, we always go. We staff have gone once or twice or more before ever there's a journey, building relationship with local leaders, so that when people come to Christ, they are immediately followed up on. I mean, immediately.
Very good.
Discipled. We don't want hands up in a meeting. So we're just really working one-on-one. And then there'll be a celebration at night. But that opens the door for us, Kerby, to ongoing transformation, where we've seen a community of 20,000 completely changed. It took us about 4 years, but what opened it up was the journey of compassion.
We'll take a break and talk more about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Steve Stewart with us for a few more minutes, and we encourage you to go to impactnations.com. And Steve, you're talking about the transformation of a culture or of an area. And I think about this because of your idea. Of course, we've heard it before, give a man a fish or teach him to fish.
Right.
Same kind of thing. I mean, here I can see pictures of women that you've taken out of desperate situations in front of a sewing machine making masks. And that's for the poor in Uganda. I see see pictures of individuals, sometimes youth at risk, learning how to use computers and learning about design, art, technology, entrepreneurship. In some respects, that's the part that is sometimes missing because, like you said, we focus maybe on evangelism, not discipleship. We focus on numbers rather than transformation. And that's one of the things I so appreciate about the work that you do there through Impact Nations.
Well, thank you. I was just chatting with my wife when we were off there about transformation, and she reminded me of a couple of obvious macros that I might have missed in terms of transformation. In Kenya, we do a lot of work in East Africa, but in Kenya, we have a partner we work with, and the plan is that women are invited to come off the streets that night, prostitution. And that prostitution it's really just about desperate economics. They're trying to feed their kids.
Yes.
And we've done this for several years. We'll go and we'll walk in the red light district and say, we've reserved a room over in this place. If you want to meet us in 15 minutes, we've got some refreshments. We want to pray for you and we will pay for your night. And this has led to a whole program. It's called Daughters of Destiny. Our partner is brilliant at it, so that the women come off the street and immediately get into housing with other Christian women who are further down the road, get healed up and so forth, but then are taught business skills. We do a lot of business skills training. And then apprentice with someone who's further down the road, and then we give them a startup loan, and they start their own business. And the only thing we ask is that they give back by helping others to be trained to start businesses. And it's now over 100,000 businesses have been started. And they're small businesses selling books on the sidewalk or fruit. Some of them start a little sewing business, but some of them, it grows and grows, and they just train more and more people. My wife was there 2 years ago, and she met a gal. She did this. She came off the street that night. She gave her life to the Lord. She got trained, and she saw her a few months ago. I hadn't seen her in a year, and she came running up to her. She now has not only her own salon, she has, I think, 12 salons with 20 girls employed in a year. Now that's transformation. We've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women get out of prison who shouldn't be there. Mm-hmm. In fact, indirectly 7,000 now. So there's that kind of transformation. And then in North India, I mentioned to you that we get 41 teams distributing food. But again, our commitment to making disciples is that these last 8 years as we work with them, if people come to Christ in the village, and it's wonderful to preach Christ in a village where they've never heard his name, we immediately, our partners immediately get them into house churches. And they now have 900,000 who are in house churches, being discipled, making disciples, baptized. And yet you won't see us doing a meeting with, 5,000 people on a platform. So transformation is very much alive and happening.
Well, again, let's real quickly, because we're just about out of time, talk about what people can find on your website, because I think all of our listeners can participate right now in maybe COVID feeding or buying or getting masks or those kinds of things. And I hope in the future we can talk about some of those journeys of compassion, but talk about when they land on the website, where to click, and also let's remind them again about that free ebook.
Yeah, right. They can get that free ebook if they go to impactnations.com/Sabbath. I would say that there's lots of needs, but the main ones right now, this pandemic goes on, and the crisis gets deeper and deeper in the developing world. So if they would like to give food, every dime, 100% of what they give goes directly to food, and sometimes within 3 days. What folks would give today, 3 days later, is food in a family's hands. That's one. And the other, that the skills in business with the face masks for freedom,
right? I
would really, really appreciate if people would give to that, because I know this team of young girls, really, they're teenagers whose lives have been completely turned around, and they're equipped and they're ready, and it's starting to go. They just got their first 2,500 mass contract, but this would have a massive, massive impact. So those are two things I'd really appreciate if they'd look at. And then the last thing is look at our bookstore in terms of how to really activate in your community with First Church Restored.
And again, that's a great resource as well. So just got all sorts of things that you can find. Again, to impactnations.com, scroll down to resources, you'll find the First Church Restored. Of course, we just talked a minute ago about how you can go to impactnations/Sabbath and find that. So if nothing else, Steve Stewart, been great to have you on the program, and look forward to the next opportunity.
Kerby, it's really been a pleasure. Good to talk to you. Bless you.
Let's take a break. First of all, while we're talking about that COVID feeding, can we now see if we can get that over 1 million? That'd be pretty exciting. And speaking of that, we have over the last couple of weeks been talking about the fact that we had a matching fund. You remember the story, and that is we had one where they spontaneously suggested that we do that by the end of our fiscal year, which is June 30th, and then extended it to July 15th. I'm glad he did, because I just heard a minute ago we're just still a little bit off, but I suspect that maybe as we go to the break, when Penna Dexter comes in here at 2 o'clock, we can celebrate that we were able to meet it. And if you were one of those people waiting to the very last moment to put us over the top, I think you'll be the one to do so. So as we take a break here, that matching fund will be off, and we just want to say thank you for the fact that at a time when there has been a lockdown, when there's been sheltering in place, for some of you out in California now, a second lockdown. Of course, even today, Steve Stewart calling from New Mexico. And I was just reading the other day about some of the limitations for people in New Mexico right now. And, of course, some of the others coming in other states. In the midst of all of that, we certainly do not take for granted the fact that we were able to, as it looks like, meet that match. And so we want to thank you for that, especially since I know, and I hear from some of you that have not been able to give because you're just simply struggling with the financial circumstances that have been placed upon you because your employer had to furlough you or let you go. And so I do thank you for those of you that were willing to step up in that space. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about a couple of issues. First of all, my Viewpoints commentary today is about statues. We will have talked about this before, but at a time when all sorts of irrational people out on the streets are tearing down statues and monuments, I wanted to start a conversation about, okay, can we as rational people maybe begin to think about what figures or monuments would be appropriate, what would be inappropriate? And I start off by talking about, obviously, ones that would be inappropriate, where you talk about individuals that are just evil individuals that did evil acts, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, the list is pretty long there. But then what about other heroes who probably have a flaw? Matter of fact, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So everybody has a flaw at one point or another. How big is that, and how do we begin to deal with that? I think we can still honor individuals even while forgiving and excusing their flaws. And so that's just a commentary today for you to look at. Penna Dexter will join me, and we'll get into a number of issues in the news. All that coming up right after this.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347 5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME, pointofview.net/time, or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me this hour. It is our Wednesday edition of Point of View, and Penna Dexter in studio with us as well. Wanted to do that because, as you might remember, we've talked about this more than once, that when we were coming to near the end of our fiscal year, which is June 30th, we had an unexpected surprise from one of our guests who said, I'd like to put a match on the table for $50,000. And he originally said, hopefully that you will have it done by the end of the fiscal year, and then changed his mind and said July 15th. I'm so glad he did, because then we had someone else want to do one for the end of the fiscal year. And so today is July 15th, which is also tax day, by the way. And Penna, I'm kind of glad that he gave us some extra time, because just heard from Warren Kelly a minute ago, I think we're just a few dollars, or maybe a few $100s, I don't know exactly what it is, short of that match. And so I'm trusting that this hour we'll get the individuals that are listening and always want to put us over the top call in, and we will have fulfilled that. But I'm really impressed the fact that at a time when there have been all these lockdowns, and we're going to talk about, you and I both grew up in California, we see now a second lockdown in California, that in the midst of shelter-in-place, lockdowns, pandemics, economic devastation, we still have been able to meet that match. And that says a lot about our listeners.
It does. They're generous, and I think they see this as a moment in history where Point of View's voice is very important. And so we need to be funded. And, one rule of getting people to support your group that's doing good work is never leave any kind of a match on the table. So we've got a $100,000 match, and we're about to end that period, and we'll get the full $100,000 if everybody steps up now and helps Point of View, and either, call the number or go online at pointofview.net. and either pledge to donate monthly or make a donation. We'd appreciate it. And as far as tax day goes, well, I was happy to get a reprieve on getting the taxes prepared, but it did arrive 3 months late this year because of COVID-19. And so some people are just now paying their income taxes or getting their refunds. Although if I were to get a refund, I would have probably filed back in April.
Yeah, I had to owe too. Not a lot, but a little bit. And again, I have always tried to do things on time, but when April 15th came and went, I thought, okay. And so we did get ours in, but just a few days ago. So that's just a good testimony to the fact that sometimes it has been so disruptive in our lives. But I thought for just a minute, you and I are both looking at the Wall Street Journal here, editorial board. And again, I have lived in California. You have lived in California. My brother lives out there. You have family out there as well. And it is amazing, because the way the editors put it is the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, pressed the panic button. And you can understand some of the concerns, because hospitalizations are up 250% in Santa Clara County, 190% in San Francisco County, 260% in San Joaquin County. But at the same time, we've all seen the economic as well as the mental and social disruption of a lockdown, haven't we?
We have. And, I'm becoming more and more to the conclusion that that's much more damaging than the consequences of COVID-19. And even though, we sit and we look around and we see these numbers going up, I just have to always go back to the premise. We began speaking this way at the very beginning, Kerby, that these lockdowns were put in place to flatten the curve. Remember that word, flatten the curve? That's been done. It's really been accomplished. And I mean, not to say that hospitals couldn't be overwhelmed again. And in certain areas, you know, it could happen. But most of the country, including all of California, there's no threat to the capacity of hospitals. And also, with the COVID numbers rising, we are not seeing the death rates that we had, and we're not seeing the hospitalizations that we had. So, I just contend there's no place for more shutdowns anywhere.
Let's, if we can, go to the other coast for just a minute, because I want to come back to California. By the way, I'd love to hear from you if you're in California right now, 1-800-351-1212. But the other thing that's happening up in New York and now maybe New Jersey is you now have 22 states. If you were to fly from, let's say, Texas or New Mexico or Florida, or wherever it might be, to New York, when you land, for example, at LaGuardia Airport, then you have to actually go to a gate and you have to fill out a form, and that is where you're met by an enforcement team, which will then check phones, paperwork, all sorts of things to say, are you from one of those dangerous states? And it isn't, like I said, just Texas or Arizona or Florida. They just the other day added Minnesota, New Mexico, Ohio, Wisconsin. And so if you don't fill out a form, you could face a fine of $2,000. If you violate a quarantine order that they put you under, you could face a $10,000 penalty. And the argument from Governor Cuomo and now even Governor Murphy is, well, you know, we didn't do this when we had millions of people from Europe coming into our states and flooding our state with the virus. So it isn't just the fact that you've got the second shutdown in California, but you've got almost an inability to travel from one state to the next. And that affects me because I was supposed to, as a matter of fact, last week have taught at Word of Life in Schroon Lake in New York. I was supposed to teach Labor Day camp at Camp of the Woods in Speculator, New York, and they said, there's just no way we can ask you to fly up here, be in a quarantine for 2 weeks, and then eventually go and teach for 3 days Labor Day camp. We'll just do something else. And so
they're still holding the camp.
Yeah, they'll probably do something, probably with a local pastor or with one of their staff. But this has changed everything.
Yes.
And to think I was with Ravi Zacharias last year at Camp of the Woods. And of course, we don't have Robbie anymore.
That was fortuitous in one sense. You got to be with him.
It has changed everybody's life. Now, for a lot of us, it's an inconvenience. Last hour, we were talking with Steve Stewart about some of the real problems. But I'd love to hear your comments because this has changed everything. Penn and I, a little bit later, are going to talk about China. But we are mindful of the fact that this pandemic and the shutdowns and some of the travel restrictions have had a very significant impact on your life, and we'd like to know what it is. So, again, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. And also, I did give you some good news the first hour. We do have a couple of vaccines that are moving along. Now, that being said, now they have to go to the 30,000 people that will be actually tested. And AstraZeneca says, you know what, we're going to produce 2 billion vials of this vaccine on the hope that on the other end it will be successful. If it's not, they'll destroy them. But that just shows you how everybody's trying to fast track all of this.
Yeah.
But you and I have expressed both on the air and off the air a little concern about when you do it that fast, how safe is it going to be as well?
Do you want to be a guinea pig?
Yes. Those 30,000 are guinea pigs right now. They know that. And so that is the case. So we have some calls coming in. So I want to hear from some of you in California first. And, of course, if you're from New Jersey, New York, something like that, you want to talk about what's going on, travel restrictions, those are the case. And then a little bit later, we have some very good articles, one about China, another about how the leftist mob wants to attack certain liberals. You just can't be liberal enough. You just can't be woke enough. And all of a sudden, some of these liberals are having the hard left coming after them as well. So we'll talk about that with Penna Dexter and you right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The list of statues that have been defaced or torn down increases each week. What started a few years ago as an attempt to remove a few statues after an extended political debate has obviously spun out of control. What do George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, Winston Churchill, Gandhi, Cervantes, Voltaire, and guitarist Stevie Ray Vaughan have in common? Well, not much, but that's just a small representation of statues that have been defaced or pulled down. Then there is the defacing of the abolitionist Matthias Baldwin and the recent toppling of the statue of former slave and abolitionist Frederick Douglass. There's no consistency in anything these mobs are doing in the streets today. So while irrational people in the streets are tearing down statues and monuments, perhaps it is time for some of us, more rational citizens, to begin to think through what figures in the public square are appropriate or inappropriate. I think we can all agree that a leader who has consistently engaged in evil acts should not be memorialized. Adolf Hitler was an evil man. So was Joseph Stalin. We don't want statues of them in this country or any other. But I'm still wondering how a statue of Vladimir Lenin ended up in Seattle's Fremont neighborhood. Every group of heroes will have some flaws. Every leader will have flaws. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Fallen heroes and fallen leaders still deserve to be honored. When men and women have failed, they deserve to be forgiven. Michael Brendan Doherty reminds us that the beautiful sculpture of Michelangelo's David stands in Florence not as a tribute or an endorsement of the murder of Uriah the Hittite, just as George Washington's name does not grace our capital city or the names of our schools because he owned slaves. A statue or memorial can honor people without excusing its flaws. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, Penna Dexter is with me in studio. And let's go out, first of all, to the state of California. Denise, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm from California. I've actually have an organization called Freedom Angels Foundation, and we've been fighting against Governor Newsom's policies. We've had representatives here in California, the Republicans, have sent out letters to Newsom asking for transparency. He has spent $1 billion of California's...
Yes, go ahead.
And then requested that counties mandate masks outside shortly after they passed their testing on the third time because they failed the second time, 2 times. He also sent positive patients to nursing homes.
Wow.
And the representatives have been asking, why would he do that when it killed these people with low immune systems? What he's also doing, and this was news broken from Church 412 Murrieta in Southern California, that Governor Newsom has been medevacing patients from Mexico and bringing them into the state. And those numbers are causing the inflation in Imperial County. After that happened, he demanded that Imperial County close because of these inflated numbers. So he's really caused destruction in California. He requested that wineries close their doors while his winery was open. And he received the relief money for California small businesses for his business. So what we're dealing with in California is actually treason. And, I appreciate you guys talking about this and bringing this to light. We're really seeing that California is setting the tone for the entire nation. So my organization has been creating protests against what he's doing. And, we're really working with the school systems to open up and small businesses to open up. And instead, he's created strike teams, which consist of the alphabet agencies going from business to business, coercing them and bullying them to close their doors while he keeps his businesses open.
Wow. A lot of what you talked about sounded similar to what Governor Cuomo did in New York. And of course, we have documentation for that. So maybe Denise can send that, or maybe we can find some good articles to document that, because as we had Dr. Merrill Matthews with us, pointed out that if you go back and look at what happened in New York State, the argument was we can't discriminate against people that have COVID-19. So you had these anti-discriminatory kind of guidelines that said you can't keep COVID patients out of the nursing homes. And that's one of the reasons why you still, to this day, have not quite half, but a little less than half of all the deaths that have taken place in some of those nursing homes.
Since when can you not, during a pandemic, take actions that, yes, they seem discriminatory in the sense that you are using your judgment to change the way you treat certain people who are sick who could pass it on to someone else? That's always been a public health principle. And suddenly we're turning a lot of things on our head today, but that's one of them. It's interesting that Denise should call and report this. First of all, I think California actually got some kudos for not doing what New York did about nursing homes. Newsom was actually complimented early on for not putting people back in nursing homes, but apparently that's not the case, or it's happening more now. But the other part of this is that I heard, I was on a call with a professor from the University of Texas, and he studies statistics. That's his specialty. He teaches it. And he was talking about the transparency of the data, the difficulty in getting good data, the inconsistencies across the country and what we're getting and how we're comparing apples to oranges a lot of times. And there was just a couple things that were interesting. One, just what she just reported, that people from the United States often have homes in Mexico. You've got retired military a lot of times living in Baja California, for instance. And you have people living over the border who are wealthy, but they get sick in Mexico because they're handling it terribly. And so there are a lot of positive people, and they can't get the medical care. So they come to the United States. They have the means to get here, perhaps, or as she said, Governor Newsom was actually medevacing people in. So they're coming in. They're going to the borders. The borders, if any cities and hospitals are close to being overwhelmed, it's border cities. And so they're moving them even further north to various places. So they're getting a test at the border, positive. Then they're getting another test at the city. And a lot of times the way it's counted, those are not counted as the same person. They're just positive tests. And that's happening also all over the country, that in some cases, positive tests are not being aggregated to the person. So if you have a test, and a lot of times you have to get tested for quite a while before you turn up negative. So a lot of the positive tests are being counted as positive people that have COVID.
Good point.
So there's a problem with the stats there.
Well, again, comes from a professor, University of Texas, in statistics. Let's take another phone call here. We'll stay in the state of California, and we'll go to KYCC. Charlie, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Well, Kerby, I would just like to say that this is really just killing our industry. We're in the aggregate industry, or the construction industry, and we travel the west part of the country with our crews and our crushers, and it really becomes challenging when you move across state lines, even by vehicle, when the state wants you to quarantine your crews. And in certain cases, they simply, once they get in the state, they can't go home because you can't quarantine on each side of the border and maintain a work schedule. And it's gotten so challenging because the state governments, and as you know, we're highly regulated in California, and the regulators are home, and they don't want to travel, and we can't move without transportation permits. We can't get environmental permits, and by the way, nobody in our company either knows or has any experience with anybody that's had the coronavirus, and yet it's like it's this evil that has been perpetrated on us, and we all agree that it's really they're just trying to get us to quit and give up. And let me tell you what, we're determined. I mean, we're just figuring out ways around it. And from us God-fearing people out here in California, we're not going to give up. And all I can say is we're just counting the days till November.
Wow.
Charlie, thank you for that call. I just wanted to throw in, because I'm from California, so is Kerby. So we know there are a lot of conservatives in California and God-fearing people. And, construction seems like an industry that could actually go on during this, because there's a lot done outside. I've noticed a lot of it going on around here in Texas. But the fact that the regulators and the government officials are still shutting you down or making it very difficult is just, it's a crime.
Well, they're just telling us, we can't move without a certain amount of permits and environmental oversight. And since we're working from home, something that might be, either sent via email or over the counter, you can't get it for weeks, and you've got, just untold amounts of equipment and personnel sitting around waiting for these when normally it would just be, easy anyway.
Let me encourage all of our listeners to pray for Charlie and his crew. And he just, I think, is a good illustration of that. And, part of the problem is the answer to everything is no. I've always said that you ask a question of a church administrator, a school administrator, or a bureaucrat, oftentimes the answer is no, because there's always the consequences. And right now, politicians are scared because they don't want to open up the schools, although we know that education is not taking place. Basically, no education's taken place since March. And you talk about the summer slump, and so then we aren't going to have in-person kind of teaching, although we've talked on this program about things that you could do in the schools, and there are all sorts of things that we can do that would be safe, but these lockdowns and these shutdowns have just been economically devastating. And of course, we've talked about just the effect on mental health, loneliness, and families and relationships and all of this. So it's not just the economic costs, it's all the other costs as well, isn't it?
When the states started reopening, some states did, and you started to see some good economic numbers coming back. And the fear factor then is starting to cause people to now shut things down again or think about doing that. And of course, this decision about schools. And, I think, didn't we learn that the damage being done is much worse than the damage being done by COVID? Have we not learned that yet? I would think that we would begin to be learning that.
Yes. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, might get into the question of China. One of the articles we've posted here relates to that, but also our good friend Gary Bowers put out some great material just confronting communist China. Again, I hasten to add, we're not against the Chinese people. They're wonderful people, but the communist Chinese are doing some great damage, and that gets us into some things about everything from the NBA to right about TikTok and even the whole completely stealing of intellectual property and so many other issues. So Penna Dexter with me. Still have that match on the table, and if you want to put us over the top, please do so. We'll come back and give you a total right after this.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that point of view is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter with me. Warren Kelly just announced that we have crossed the finish line, so we've made it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for what you've been able to do. And we'll take down, again, the matching fund, but it is amazing to me, in the circumstances we find ourselves in, that we were able to meet the match. And thank you, Foster Freeze, for extending it to the 15th. We needed every hour of that day just about to do that. And we're going to spend some time, and at the end we'll probably say thank you one more time, talking about China. You might say, why? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, there has been a lot of new information out of China. There has been some testimony from the FBI Director Christopher Wray. We'll get to that. There have been some actions taken by the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. There's been the reaction to the way in which the NBA has not handled China, which led to a back and forth between an ESPN reporter and Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri. And there has also been the expression and concern about TikTok. And you might say, how does that relate to China? We'll get to that in just a minute, because Mike Pompeo as well. So for about 4 or 5 different reasons, China is in the news. But Penna, you have one here from Gary Bauer, in which we now know a little bit more about what was happening when this top virologist in China began to realize the dangers of the coronavirus.
And, some people may have read about this. It was fairly obscurely reported in some sources, but back in late April, Dr. Li Mengyan, who is a top Chinese virologist living in Hong Kong, defected to the United States, and she did an exclusive interview with Fox News. She was among the first Chinese doctors to begin researching the novel coronavirus in late December. And she knew back then that there was human-to-human transmission. She knew that the virus was a threat. She knew that it was becoming a pandemic, but her superiors warned her to keep quiet or risk being, quote, disappeared. So she's a brave doctor. Chinese authorities at that very same time were telling the World Health Organization that the virus was not contagious to humans, and they knew that was false. So this is a reason to be utterly distrustful of China on the COVID front. She kept watching these, this is Dr. Yan, she kept watching the lies coming out of Beijing, and she decided to flee Hong Kong so that she could tell the truth about what she knew. Her husband apparently refused to leave because he said the Chinese authorities would kill all of us. And you do know that the Chinese are, they're solidifying control over Hong Kong now. So he was probably, not off base and having that fear. So she had that interview with Fox News to tell us that. And I think that's, that's one reason why we need to look at China and take steps to, in as many ways as possible, divorce ourselves to stand up against some of their bad activities, criminal activities, and national security devastating activities. But there are people out of the Wuhan lab and other labs that have come to the West. They're turning over evidence about the Chinese Communist Party. And this is Steve Bannon, this is a quote from him. And that party has repeatedly lied to the world, says Gary Bauer, tried to corner the market on vital medical supplies and also send effective supplies to other countries. They've been at the heart of, as we know, the Wuhan virus situation, and they've never owned up to their lies and just really disingenuous about it.
So again, that is one issue of the virus itself. Let's get to the other one that Gary Bauer talked about, because we had this testimony that took place from the FBI Director, Christopher Wray. And what he did was just talk about the fact that, and can you believe this, these are counterintelligence cases that are done in the FBI, and nearly half of all the cases are focused just on China. So anybody that thinks that China, and again, when I say China, I'm talking about the Chinese Communist Party. We love the Chinese people, had a chance to meet them on many occasions. Many have come to this country, but we're talking about this Communist Party that is engaged in cyber attacks, predatory trade practices, economic espionage, and all the rest. So what do we know about that?
Well, first of all, there's so many different things that China's been guilty of. I mean, we just mentioned and described the COVID issue. That's one. And then this was shocking. And this is over 1,000 counterintelligence cases focused on China,
yes.
Like maybe 1,025 or something like, or 250. So that's a lot.
Yeah, China is your enemy, in case you had any question about it. Yes.
And then there's cyber attacks and the predatory trade practices that President Trump has been fighting. And then you have the colleges and universities. You've got they've infiltrated many colleges and universities, and also government research facilities. You've got the military activities now in the South China Sea that Mike Pompeo is trying to call them on. You've got religious persecution going on in the country. You've got the NBA issues. And you've got now in Hong Kong, they're violating their agreement on Hong Kong and going in and trying to control things there. So there's so much that China is doing. And one more thing is, of course, the 5G technology. The Hawaii company that we are not allowing to manufacture, or we're not going to accept their technology for 5G here. The UK has now finally decided that they're not either. They partially did this because of Hong Kong, and partially because they've seen that the United States has also made that decision. So China is being held to account in one sense, but we don't see a lot changing.
If you've listened to some of the interviews we've done more recently with Gordon Chang or with a variety of other individuals that have looked at this, you can see why Mike Pompeo right now is saying that today we are strengthening U.S. policy in a vital contentious part of Asia, which would be the South China Sea. We're making it clear that Beijing's claims to offshore resources across most of South China Sea are completely unlawful. We're standing with our Southeast Asian allies and partners to protect their sovereign rights to offshore resources, and we stand with the international community in defense of freedom of the seas and respect for the sovereignty, and reject any push to impose might makes right in the South China Sea or the wider region. And that's kind of a brief summary of the military threats from China. So that is certainly the case. But just before we take a break, let me talk about the NBA, since I love the NBA, and we did post this article, so you can read it in its entirety. But I think Tom Joyce does a good job of pointing out that when it comes to social justice, the NBA is full of activists, he says, but when it comes to China, well, criticism's nowhere to be found. And a lot of that goes back to this ESPN reporter, Adrian Wojnarowski, who actually, I've used a couple of swear words, that's a nice way to say it, to the Republican Senator Josh Hawley in Missouri. And the reason for it is Josh Hawley has been very openly critical of the fact that now that the NBA is going to play a very limited season, emphasis on the limited season, but they're still going to let the individuals out there have a Black Lives Matter patch on their jerseys, but they certainly can't have one that says fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong, because the last time somebody said that was the general manager of the Houston Rockets, Daryl Morey, forced to apologize. You might say, now, wait a minute. We've got these individuals that on a routine basis love to criticize Donald Trump. And he, by the way, gives them some reasons to criticize them, but can't say a word about the Chinese Communist Party. And I think the answer to that one is follow the money, because once you realize that this is an open door for individuals in the NBA to really go out there and make a difference and make a lot of money. They have a fan base out there, and the NBA has been given access to the Chinese market. when you got 1 billion people there, they figure out, Penna, if you can believe this, 500 million people in China watch an NBA game.
They love their basketball, don't they?
Oh, my goodness. So, of course, there's a real cost to criticizing China. And so here, the whole NBA came raining down on the general manager of the Houston Rockets for just tweeting out an image that said, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." Pretty amazing.
That was too bad. You know, we can, our NFL players can critique the United States of America all they want, and we don't seem to care. And our fan base is pretty much all Americans. But the same doesn't go for China. They're looking at that those dollars flowing in, I guess, from the sports, especially basketball.
Well, again, we also have another piece with LeBron James. And LeBron James, Kevin Durant, you've got Greg Popovich. So whether it's players or coaches, love to criticize the president or even America, but boy, they just can't say anything about China. And so the one that got me the other day, though, is it's bad enough that you don't have LeBron James saying anything about China, but now he even wants that ESPN personality to be freed from a suspension prompted by his, I guess a nice word to say it, profane outbursts at a U.S. senator. So one more issue. We come back. While we're talking about China, I might also mention, what about this TikTok issue? That's another one that relates to China right after this.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Penna Dexter with us. And again, thank you for helping us meet the finish line. We'll talk about that before this hour is over. But I thought for just a minute I would mention TikTok. Now, let me mention that both my daughters have done TikTok videos, so I understand all of this. But the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, the other day said the government is looking into banning TikTok because of the concern about how the app is being used. Now, the pushback, which I think many of you probably have seen, have come from some of the people in the tech world. And the pushback has not been very encouraging to me because they say, now, wait a minute, just because TikTok is actually located there in China and just because there is data flowing there doesn't mean, first of all, that that's possibly dangerous. Although, did I just try to explain to you in the last segment how China is an enemy? Okay. And then they say, well, let's just be understanding. One of them says, we shouldn't be skeptical of TikTok because, after all, they're not collecting any more information than America's equivalents, which would be, of course, Facebook and everything. And well, that's not a very good argument, first of all, because, of course, I love this piece here by Jimmy Quinn. No doubt American tech companies have been culpable of massive user data and privacy breaches. Just look at Cambridge Analytica. However, the claim that there is any equivalence between those data privacy issues and the possibility that an app, which is very beholden to authoritarian countries' demands, is simply incorrect. I have a better word for it, but I'll use that one as well. So we're not thrilled about how all these American companies are collecting data on us. You should be really concerned about how a government, the Chinese government, actually could very easily, and probably is, gaining access to all sorts of data. And so as I think a question that ends at the end of this article, there's an important question that neither of them ask. Why should an app developed in a country complicit in whitewashing and censoring evidence of mass atrocities be allowed to operate in the United States?
I think that's a good question. That's one thing that President Donald Trump has done. He's been a disruptor with regard to our relationship with China. And, of course, he negotiates things back and forth and, the art of the deal and all of that. But if he can speak sensibly to these issues and if he can be very, very tough on some of them, I think that will help him. As his poll numbers are just abysmal right now in a lot of places that are important. I think it'll help him and it will help the country. It will be a good thing. It will be a good accomplishment of his, whether he's reelected or not, to help us to have a better stance and position vis-a-vis China.
Well, and if nothing else, I think most people would have to say that he's done a pretty good job of standing up to China. And if you don't think he's done a very good job of standing up to China, because I know there may be some that say he hasn't done enough, do you think Joe Biden will be better at it? And I don't think there's any evidence to suggest, if anything, he would be less likely. And we have, Penna Dexter, since we're some of the old people around the table, remember back in the 1990s when we talked about the influence of China in the Clinton administration. And here now we see it certainly in the lives of Joe Biden and his son and those kinds of things. So if you believe that China is an enemy, we need to stand up to him. You got a much better chance with President Donald Trump than you have with former Vice President Joe Biden, I would think.
And I think so that all the trade issues are one thing, and then the coronavirus issue. I mean, if that does not play against China, I don't know what does.
Yes. Well, just before we leave, this very good piece by Victor Davis Hanson, I called it, "Who Will the Leftist Mob Attack Next?" He called it peak Jacobinism, but that might not mean much to you. But it's the idea that during the French Revolution, what happened is, at first they went and got the aristocracy, but before it was through, a lot of people that were losing their heads in the guillotine were people that had originally supported the French Revolution in the first place. And we're seeing this same kind of thing because his subtitle is "Even the Woke Fear the Guillotine." And we're seeing people that were liberal, feminist, progressives now being cancel culture and all sorts of things. So what did you find in that article? Because I thought it was very well written.
Yes, it was. First of all, we see the violence and the riots and the Black Lives Matter stuff going on. And we're finding now that, there are a lot of them, and some of the more reasonable ones are getting very embarrassed by the terrible destruction that's taking place. So there's an embarrassment of some liberals against the more radical leftist liberals, and that plays down to a lot of other issues. For instance, another one that Victor Davis Hanson mentions is the woke rich. So they're very wealthy, but part of their rhetoric right now has been wealth, has been income taxes, capital gains, and these people are very rich, and they're not going to suffer too much because they have the resources, but there are going to be taxes that affect the middle class, the mainstream liberal person. That they're going to be going, wait a minute, I thought we were all on the same side, but now you're penalizing me. And then as far as the destruction goes, again, it was peaceful protests. Then it became more violent protests. Then it became taking down statues and burning churches. And, Hanson brings up the idea that what about, Mount Rushmore? You've heard people talking about the destruction there. So, leftist positions on things is one thing, but the ball keeps on moving to go to radical destruction that I don't think the mainstream liberals are for.
I don't think so either.
There's a lot more in this piece. People should read it.
One of the things I thought was kind of interesting is about on the third page he mentions the CEO of Goya Foods, and we've talked about him earlier in the week, Robert Ananu, who actually simply went to the White House and because he wanted to donate this food, which is, again, these canned foods, if you like frijoles blanco and all sorts of things. But because he said something nice about Donald Trump, now they've created this boycott, which has then created a boycott. And all sorts of individuals now are saying, I've never bought these canned goods, but I'm going to buy them and make Tex-Mex. And so he's ignored those individuals. And I think it illustrates the point that sometimes if you stand up to this cancel culture, there'll be people that get behind you and fight it back as well, because this has gotten further down the road than I think many of the liberals would have anticipated, because they did not realize how far left the left would, where eventually the left are even attacking some of their fellow liberals about these issues.
So just ask Barry Weiss, the editor of the New York Times, who quit yesterday.
Yes, that was such a sad commentary. So if nothing else, this is a good piece. And by the way, since we mentioned the NBA, by the end, he's mentioning the NFL and the NBA. So we may have sports again, but these games just get played all the time. Political games, but I don't know if we'll actually have
maybe
some
that'll be our new sport to watch. Political games.
Political games. And all these NBA and NFL Pledge of Allegiance and kneeling and all that kind of stuff. So it's just crazy stuff that we're going to be dealing with. But nevertheless, we're just about out of time. And I thought, Penna, one more time, we might just say, hey, thank you for helping us meet our match. That was something that was very nicely done by Foster Freeze, and I'm glad he gave us till July 15th.
I think it was really nice of him, and it's really important that people, even though we've met the match, just have as a mindset the ongoing support of Point of View. Really the underpinnings of what is America now are under attack. And you're not going to get a real balanced, truthful account from the media. As for however many 45 years we've been in existence, we bring the truth. We do a lot of research. We put a lot of backup support information on the internet at pointofview.net. That's also where our donate button is. So we would ask that you would make use of it. And thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who have supported us.
I would certainly thank you once again. Let me just mention tomorrow that Dr. Merrill Matthews will be here. One of his interviews will be with Sidney Powell, who was the attorney for Michael Flynn. And so I think you'll enjoy that. And Penna Dexter and I guess Jeremy Dice will be with us on Friday. So we've got a really good week coming up. And first of all, I want to thank Andrew and Steve and Ivy for their help behind the scenes. Thank you again for helping us meet the match. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have.